I've always had a pretty strong sense of myself, but this season that served me really well. And so as I was talking to people and they just kept saying, you guys just did amazing with him, that I thought, okay, so what did we do? What's so amazing about it? And I started to kind of put that down on paper and really started praying about it. And I felt like the Lord was saying, I have a message that I want you to share. And I want you to encourage people to honor their parent all the way to the end. And I think it's hard to do, and we aren't equipped very well to do that, but learning how to walk them all the way home and have no regrets and still have a life that we love is a tall order. But I wanted to be the one who could say, you can do that. It is possible. You don't have to be resentful and bitter. You don't have to give up everything and feel like you aren't a person anymore. You have choices. So let's get intentional. Let's make some different choices.
Welcome to the All's Authors Podcast. We're so glad you found us. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'm Marianne Shuko, a registered nurse, author, and dementia daughter.
And I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a licensed educational psychologist, dementia daughter, Al's author, and coach focused on the sandwich generation. Please join us for bi-weekly episodes with our authors as we talk about their dementia journeys, sharing intimate details and painfully obtained knowledge to help others currently on that path.
We hope these stories offer you comfort and support as we strive to break the silence and stigma surrounding a dementia diagnosis.
May one of our authors speak to your experience.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi, it's Marianne. Before we get started on the podcast, I have a very special invitation for you. On Friday, September 1st at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, All's Authors is hosting a panel discussion on Zoom with 5 of our authors, all living with dementia, some for more than 10 years. Wendy Mitchell, Jennifer Butte, Hedda Saunders, Peter Berry, and Michael Ellenbogen will tell us how they cope with cognitive impairment, stay active and vital, maintain a positive attitude, and much more. Now, we've done this before. This is a reunion of these authors who first came together for an All's Authors virtual event on June 15th, 2021. We wanted to get together again 2 years later to see how or if their lives have changed since we first met. You will be enlightened and encouraged as they all have inspiring and interesting stories to tell. To register for the event, please visit our website, allsauthors.com. That's ALZAUTHORS.com, or find the link in the show notes. This event will be recorded, so it's important to register so you can not only receive the link to the live event, but also the replay. In the meantime, catch the replay from the 2021 event, which is also in the show notes. We look forward to seeing you. Hey, Christy, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Hi, Marianne. I'm excited to be here. This is going to be a really nice podcast today, and I'm excited to talk with our author, Rayna Neises.
Yes, Rayna is also a podcaster, so we have that in common. She is the author of No Regrets, Hope for Your Caregiving Season, and she considers caregiving to be just another season of life, which is a very interesting concept. We're going to get into that. But there are a few things about her that are remarkable. She is a very young caregiver. Her mother was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's when she was just 16 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
So she lived 12 years with that disease. So Rayna, went through the whole dementia caregiving experience at a very rough time.
Yeah,
for teenage years and into college. So that's a very hard time for kids to go through something like this. And then her dad, he was diagnosed just 6 years after her mom died. So she really had the double whammy. That's what I call it. As you know, because you had the double whammy too.
For sure. But mine was concurrent. It was like, it just stretched out her journey to be a much longer time period. And absolutely, 16 is just still a very tender age. And this is going to be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah. And she's the wife of a farmer. She lives in Kansas. So I find that to be really fascinating as well. And she tells us about that. And she also runs her own caregiver coaching business as well. So she has turned the tragedies in her life into more powerful and positive experience to help others. A lot of that is based on her personal faith too.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think it's going to be interesting, and also to hear. I'm excited to hear her talk about how she conceptualizes this as a season, because I feel like having a framework for how you're approaching your caregiving journey. We often say journey, and so season is another way to look at it. That it's not forever, and so it'll be interesting to hear her sort of tease that out for us. And she's a coach and has an awful lot to offer folks. So. Excited.
All right. So let's get started.
Excellent. Hi, Rayna. Welcome to the Al's Authors podcast today. We're excited to have you and hear about your book and what you're up to. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And we have Marianne Shuka with us as well. Hi, Marianne.
Yep. Hi. How are you? Welcome, Rayna.
Thank you.
So we have Rayna Neises, and excited to have you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, Rayna.
Sure. So I currently am a farm wife. I live on a farm in Kansas and right in the middle of a cornfield at the moment. I was a city girl growing up, so it's a whole different world moving to the farm, but it's a great life and very thankful for that. I have had the opportunity to write No Regrets, Hope for Your Caregiving Season, which is our family's story. I unfortunately have the position of having lost both parents to Alzheimer's disease. And so that I just share more about our story, how we handled it as a family, and how I took care of myself during my caregiving season.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I really identify with that. I shared with you earlier when we first met, I also lost both parents to dementia. So it is definitely a difficult situation for families. So I'm excited to hear more about what led you to write your book and what you're doing now. And I love the framing of it as a season, and how that is something that sometimes, unfortunately, many of us have gone through or will go through. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I was 16 when my mom was diagnosed. And obviously that meant there were some things earlier than the diagnosis that were kind of giving us some clues into what was happening. I have a sister who is 3 years older. And so she was actually off to college by the time my mom was diagnosed. And that was definitely one of the pieces that I think changed a lot. Was I went from having that ally who could reassure me that, I did tell her that, or I don't know why she's saying that, that kind of thing, to being on my own. And it was pretty difficult. Also, my mom's progression, she was just 53. And so her progression was really different. And so one of the things, my senior research paper was about Alzheimer's. That's kind of how I learned about the disease. And so with my mom's age being so young, I was looking at 3 to 5 years and expecting her to be gone. So that kind of influenced a lot of things, and definitely was not actually what happened. My mom actually lived 12 years. My dad took early retirement 4 years after her diagnosis, and I was away at college and things had gotten worse, and he was more aware of what was happening. And so he stayed home and took care of her. About that same time, I would say my mom became pretty nonverbal. So she spent most of her time speaking gibberish. She was really easygoing, and she was always a homebody. So those were great things for her and made home a great place for her to be. But over the 12-year period, majority of it, we fed her. We took her to the restroom regularly, bathed her, dressed her, all of those things. Yeah. And then as she progressed through the disease, my dad was able to, bring in some help and keep her at home. After her passing, then about 7 years later, my dad called me and was like, hey, I'm kind of worried about my memory. And I'm like, don't worry about it. I'm sure it's just normal aging, right? Because that's the number one question. What's normal, especially when you've had a loved one with Alzheimer's. So sadly, that wasn't true. We did get that diagnosis, and he lived 14 years with the disease. And my sister and I made the choice to keep him at home. That was his request. Upon his diagnosis, he just said, girls, I really would like to be at home as long as possible. And so I don't know what that means. And that was definitely a question we had to kind of wrestle with a little bit. But since that was his wishes and he had prepared financially, we were able to do that.
That's tremendous. I think it's wonderful that he was able to tell you what he wanted so that you both could, or the whole family could then rally around his choices and make that happen for him. And great that he had financially prepared for that. So, how much do you think taking care of your mother was something that helped your father think about planning?
The thing that was really amazing is they got long-term care insurance when it first rolled out. So he actually had long-term care insurance on my mom, which this was back in 86. And so it was definitely something that helped him. But that he taking that early retirement and just planning ahead for retirement was the piece that was so important and allowed him to then have the financial piece of it. We definitely... I don't know. He didn't really talk a lot about, he just knew that he wanted to be at home. And we never really talked about, well, how long, what will that look like? How will we do that? I'm 220 miles from his house. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a small ask for us to figure out, but it was marching orders for me, an opportunity for me to really say, how can we do this?
Yeah.
This is what he wanted. How can we do this? If it wasn't possible, I know it's not a lot possible for a lot of families. I think you just have to figure out what works for your family. But we were blessed to be able to make that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so you talk about this time period as a season. Can you explain a little bit about how that came to you and how you envision that and how that might help other caregivers to think about this?
So I'm a certified coach through the International Coach Federation, and I was coaching before or during the time that I was caring for my dad. And so it was one of those things that as I was talking to people, I just realized for myself, I had a high schooler at home. It was a 220-mile drive. It wasn't like I could just pop in and come back home. So I actually went up and stayed Thursday through Sunday with him and was the hands-on caregiver for him while I was there. But I knew that was just a period of time. It was only going to be for so long. And the thing that I just laugh at now when I think about is when we got to this point. So just my dad was, his sister was living in the home with him. He had a cancer scare and developed MRSA. And it was just a really difficult season. So we went from being pretty independent, not driving, but able to help with dinner, take care of all of his daily living tasks, to not, to just a lot of confusion, a lot of struggle after the surgery. And my aunt was like, I can't do all this. And so my sister and I had to come together and say, okay, what does that mean? So immediately we started looking at memory care facilities. And now, mind you, Dad was still at the gym 3 times a week. He had gotten back into volleyball after the surgery. So we had that physical activity going on for him. And that's what he loved. And so as I would tour these places, physical activity to them is chair yoga, right?
Exactly.
That's not going to happen with my dad. He's going to think that's stupid. And so though he was struggling with some of those things, that was not something he struggled with. In fact, we played ping pong 3 weeks before he died. So he just had that really ingrained in who he was. And so as we were looking at options, I just would leave in tears because I just couldn't imagine my dad in that small place without the opportunity to do the things that he loved. And so my husband, I came home in tears and my husband's like, well, what's going on? I'm like, I just can't see him there. And he's like, then don't do it. And I'm like, come on, what's the option here? And he's like, if you need to live with him, if you need to do that, that's what you need to do. And that's kind of what helps me put together a plan and be able to approach my sister and say, okay, I found that we can bring caregivers in. I'll come half the week. Can we try it? Give me 6 months. Yeah. I don't know what I thought was going to happen after 6 months, but I was like, give me 6 months. And so we did it for 4.5 years. Mm-hmm. So I know for myself that mindset of this is only for a period of life. I'm going to give up doing some of the volunteer work that I did. I was teaching part-time as a reading specialist in a small private school or near home. I gave that up. I had to let go of things, but I knew it was only for a period of time. Dad wasn't going to live forever. And so I wanted to be able to invest what I had at that time. And I think for me personally, starting to see it as a season, as a short period of time of life, there'll be new seasons, there'll be new times to take on some of these things I'm not getting to do right now. It really did help me. So after losing my dad, I started to really pray about how could I support other people? There's so many of us that are trying to care for our aging parents, and it's unknown ground. We've not done this before. And it seems like we don't talk about it very much. When someone becomes a parent for the first time, there's tons of resources out there. But whenever you find yourself in a place where you need to care for an aging parent, especially with dementia, there just really haven't been a lot of resources. We're definitely doing better at getting more and more, but it was one of those things that I felt like I could help do this. And as I talked to other people, they really resonated with that season and thought, gosh, it is. I'm just helping. I'm just in a season where they need me more, and realizing that I think brings hope, and it also makes it feel more doable.
Right. It's a wonderful framework, because that feeling of, oh my gosh, how long is it going to go on? Realizing, let's get real here. It's a season, it's a time period. And so I think it's a beautiful way to sort of walk through that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also encouraging to understand there's seasons within the season. It's like sometimes there are crises. Sometimes there's quiet. There's normalcy that kind of settles in a little bit. And then we have an illness where we got to be on high alert. And then we got to step back and move back into the new normal. So I think that concept, like you said, can just be really helpful all the way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of caregivers feel, when they're in the midst of all of that is their life, and it doesn't end. And when will it end? And who am I going to be next? And it's just it's a finite period of time. It could last decades. It will last years. But it is just a season. It is just a part of life.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah. And I think, you say we don't talk a lot about it. I find that also to be true, that it's interesting how after I lost both my parents, suddenly everybody had a lot of questions for me and people wanted to talk about it. And that was what led me to write my book. So for you, what led you to then write the book? Was it the sort of conversations you were starting to have? And I'd love to hear about the title, No Regrets. So if you could tell a little bit about that.
So actually at my dad's funeral, we had him at a day stay facility a couple of days a week. And the director of the day stay attended his funeral, and she came and gave me a hug and just said, we missed your dad already. And we just wanted to encourage you and just tell you how much we loved him. And I want to tell you, you and your sister need to write a book. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, why? Why would you say that? And she said, you guys were not medical professionals, but you handled it in such a different way. You kept his dignity and you really honored him. And she said, I really think that you have a story to tell that people need to hear. And that was the first. And there were a couple of other people over the next 4 or 5 months when honestly, I was in a pretty deep grief. You go from this intense caregiving with my dad. He threw a blood clot, had surgery. They removed the clot. He recovered from that and was able to leave rehab and move back to his home. And we thought, okay, we're on the uphill. And instead of that, he moved back home and he just kind of took a deep breath and was just at peace and content and let go and was gone within 9 days of moving him home. Yeah. So it's a long journey to the end, but it's a sudden journey when you get there. Right. And so it really was shocking to us. But for him, I just knew that we had really teamed together well. I felt like I came out of that season healthy and strong, and so many people don't. And I think part of it was my coaching and just really checking in on myself and having boundaries and knowing it's okay to say no and knowing it's okay to pay for help and just being able to say, this isn't working anymore. I need to do something different. I've always had a pretty strong sense of myself, but this season that served me really well. And so as I was talking to people and they just kept saying, you guys just did amazing with him, that I thought, okay, so what did we do? What's so amazing about it? And I started to kind of put that down on paper and really started praying about it. And I felt like the Lord was saying, I have a message that I want you to share. And I want you to encourage people to honor their parent all the way to the end. And I think it's hard to do, and we aren't equipped very well to do that, but learning how to walk them all the way home and have no regrets and still have a life that we love is a tall order. But I wanted to be the one who could say, you can do that. It is possible. You don't have to be resentful and bitter. You don't have to give up everything and feel like you aren't a person anymore. You have choices. So let's get intentional. Let's make some different choices. So that's kind of what spurred me to say, okay, this is what I do have something to say and put that in. And that's kind of where no regrets came from, is when I really looked at and stood at his funeral. I didn't regret any of the decisions that I made. And by no means was I perfect. This wasn't a perfect journey. I didn't do everything right all the time, but I did it intentionally. And each time I found myself in a place where I wasn't doing something right or something wasn't going well, I changed it. And to me, that's where the hope is.
Yeah. That's terrific. That sounds wonderful.
Your journey, it morphed into like so much more. And one of the messages that we try to share through All's Authors is that there is life after caregiving, and it can be good. You will not be defined by your experience. And so many people have losses beyond the loss of their loved one in regard to their job, their career, their home. Many people leave their home and they go back to their parents' home, or they somehow relocate. And there's a lot of stories like that. And this would be easy to feel like, what do I have left? Most of us at this time, we're at midlife, and it's really hard to reinvent yourself when you're in your 40s or 50s or even older. So tell us a little bit about how you put together all of this, through the book. You have the podcast and your caregiving coaching that you do, and the magazine. Can you just tell us how all of this got started?
So I was already coaching and just kind of working with women in transition. So whether they be divorced or job seeking, just kind of finding themselves in transition, I thought there's nothing bigger than this of, really having to juggle all of these things at this season in life. And so after Dad's passing and just kind of through the grief and mourning and processing the book, I thought, I really have a lot to share for people to help them to maintain their identity. Because like you said, Marian, it's definitely common to hear that people give it all up and lose themselves completely. And I almost feel like people feel like it's give it all up and lose myself, or disengage and not be a part. And there's a lot in the middle of that. And that's what I wanted to share with people is, no, let's look at the middle. How do we be intentional? How did I stay half the week with my dad and half the week in my home with my husband and my youngest son? And kids getting married and grandkids being born and all of those events happening and still feel like I got to be all of the people. I think I did that through being intentional. And so as I started really looking at what I did, what practices I had in the book, the first 10 chapters are kind of the how-to. What did we do? How do we handle managing medications, hiring and firing companies, dynamics within our own family. But the last 6 chapters are, what did I do? How did I do this? And when I really started to break those things down, there were a couple of pieces that were really important to me. And part of it was that learning to have that self-check-in. And I feel like coaching is that. It's holding space to just ask the questions and let the person just share. And so many times when we're caregiving, really in so much of life, but definitely when we're rushing from one task to another and we don't have the space to stop and really process. How are you? What's going well? What's not going well? What do you need? And just having someone who can ask you those questions and listen and then help you spur you into problem solving instead of digging the hole deeper and wallowing in it all. Actually say, well, what could you do differently? Who can you ask to take that over? Or what can you do to get some relief, to get respite? And so through that, then I started talking to more and more people, and I felt like a podcast was an opportunity to share some resources and to have other people's stories and let people become more aware and less alone, because this can be a pretty lonely journey if you don't choose to reach out and get the support. And so the podcast was just born out of an opportunity. I like to talk a lot more than write. I laugh that I'm even an author because I definitely am not a writer, and my lowest grade in school and all of those things that come along with that. I love to talk. And so the podcast has been a great blessing through that. But also then, how do you continue to encourage your spirit? And so through that, I've developed Content Magazine, and I have actual caregivers that are sharing their stories in the magazine. The magazine is actually an electronic edition, and I kind of have one print edition out, but it's electronic, so it's on your phone. It's available to pick up. It's full of scripture, stories, devotion, encouragement. I have a section with brain trainers, because we all know we've got to keep our brains active, and opportunities to maybe listen to some music, some just different things like that. So I've created that this year. It's Content Magazine, just helping caregivers find the space to take that deep breath, get away with God, be reminded that He's there in the chaos, and then move back into your caregiving refreshed and ready to go. So all of those resources have just kind of come out of things that I've heard people that what they need and things that I know helped me through my journey.
Yeah. I love the way you talk about having intention with how you were doing things. I think that that's so important, and it can easily be that you get so caught up in all the stuff you're doing that you're not really present to anything. You're just putting one foot in front of the other, and there's not that conscious level of connection with what you're doing. And so I'm wondering too, you talked about having, your husband and kids at home. And was that ever a challenge for you? And how did you how did you employ some of those boundaries and intentionality in all of that to keep your family? Also, they're going through it with you, even if they're not doing the day-to-day with you.
Yeah. And that's what was so important, was that support. I mean, without my husband's support, especially, it wouldn't have been possible. Our son he's a great guy. And so he really was very independent in high school, doing his thing. He wasn't one that you had to follow along behind and worry about. But definitely, I tried to make sure that when I was here, I was at the events. And eventually the first 2.5 years, it was every weekend. And then I got to a point where I dropped back to every other weekend. I would occasionally, obviously graduation, those kinds of things. I ask off for those things, but I think I just made it a point to be where I was. But one of the things that I talk about in my book, if you don't mind, I was going to read a section.
I love that. Yeah.
I created what is called a manifesto. And you've probably heard of other people's manifestos. It's not associated with something good most of the time. They're usually crazy people, right, that are doing bad things. But a personal manifesto helps you to clarify what is most important to you. And so I created my first manifesto. I think it was the second year that I was caregiving. And I started to really just read it regularly. And this was something that I used to help me make decisions, because there's always, when you're a busy person who gets things done, people are always asking you to do things, right? And so it was one of those things that I was like, okay, I need to be able to have a measurement here to say what's most important, and how do I say yes or say no, depending on that. So this is my personal manifesto that I wrote while I was caregiving. I am the daughter of a loving king who desires to love him in all that she does. I am a supportive and loving wife to my farmer. I'm a daughter, sister, stepmonster, gram, and friend who values relationships with my family and friends by making them a priority. I'm a person who shares her life transparently so that others may be encouraged to walk confidently with God. I know that there is hope even when life stinks. I believe in truth-telling, compassion, honesty, integrity, and consistency. I think, feel, and act with grace always. So I think the thing about a manifesto is it helps you define what your most important roles are. It helps you put those things in order, a priority. And then it also gives you a little bit to aspire to. So was I always grace-filled? No. Was it something I needed to work on? Yeah. And so it's one of those things that reminding myself that I can make that choice. I can ask forgiveness and move into it again, and, be gracious, not only because that word came to me in the beginning to be grace-filled with those around me, whether it be family or people who are working for us to support my dad. There's a lot to be done. And there could be times that I had expectations that were unmet. And so how did I handle that gracefully? But then God turned it around on me and said, Rayna, are you being graceful to yourself? Are you giving yourself the grace whenever you mess up or whenever things aren't the way that you want them to be? So I think by having those things in my manifesto, it encouraged me to really be able to say no to teaching Sunday school because that doesn't fit right now. But at the same time, to be able to say yes to, even if I'm tired, I'm going to that ball game or I'm going to that Scholars Bowl. I'm going to spend my time where it's most important.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the the simple act of saying no is a powerful self-care. And it's also, I think, really great for people around. I mean, that's great role modeling for our kids too, right? We don't want them to develop a habit of say yes to everything and run yourself ragged. It's like being able to explain that to them and share that with them is important too.
One of my favorite quotes, David Allen says, you can do anything, you just can't do everything. And I think that's so true because you can't do everything, and especially not at the same time, right? So you just have to pick and choose. And that's one thing that season comes back to is, go ahead and let that go. It might come back later or something else might come back. So,
yeah. I know is a very good word. I learned how to use the word no through my child, and she would ask me things that just became like my reflex. And that would buy me time to think about it and figure out what I wanted to do, for whatever it was she was asking for, and if we could do it. And then can always change your mind. Mm-hmm. Right. But instead of just absorbing everybody's demands and then suddenly realizing that you just overextended yourself. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the keys is realizing you just make a decision. Mm-hmm. It might be a bad one, but the good news is you can make a new one. It's not permanent. So
that's right. There are do-overs.
There are do-overs.
There are do-overs sometimes. And I'm interested. I know you shared earlier when we were talking, you do have a support group that you run. Was that something that you availed yourself of? Did you have a support group, or how did you come to so first, did you have one? And if not, how did you come to know that would be something that would be powerful for other folks?
So I did not participate in a support group. I think my sister and I developed our own support group. That was one thing. The intentionality came in on Friday afternoons. We would go to the chiropractor or there's a salt room that you can go and detox, and we would just kind of debrief. the thing that was really interesting is my sister and I really didn't have much of a relationship before we took care of my dad. And so we just had really different lives, and not that we didn't get along, but we just never really invested in it. And so I knew that I needed to do that in order for us to team well. So we invested that time together. So I often say she was my support group. We definitely had a lot of that together. I also had coaching that I was doing. So I just didn't find the need for that. The support group that I partner with, Nourish for Caregivers, is a faith-based support group, and it actually started because of COVID. I had started work. There's a Nourish for Caregivers is faith-based and available nationwide to churches to have support groups. So I'd started leading. Actually, I agreed to do it before Dad passed away, started not too long after he passed away, leading a face-to-face support group through Nourish for Caregivers in the Wichita Diocese, the Catholic Church. And then when COVID came, they reached out and said, hey, we're interested in doing some Zoom support groups. Would you be willing to help? And I was jumped on board, and we actually did 100 days every day at 10 a.m. Central Time.
That's amazing.
Offering support during COVID. Mm-hmm. A team of us would just facilitate. We call it house calls, and we start with praying together, reading the word, asking how that encouraged each other, and then just going around the table and asking how we can support each other, and then close in prayer. And so we have continued that. I still lead every Tuesday morning, and it's open to anyone to be able to be there. We definitely have people who have family members with dementia. We have others that are caring for people that have other concerns, but it's a sweet time. I wouldn't give it up for anything. It's every Tuesday. We also have started doing every other Thursday evening, or actually the second and fourth Thursday evening. And what I love about support group is that we've just become a family. Even though there's some in Pennsylvania, I'm in Kansas, and some in California, we just really always are there for each other for that encouragement and prayer and sometimes advice, but mainly it's just being able to be heard. So.
Right. And I think you used the term earlier, that holding space. It's so nice to find a place where you can just say what's really on your heart or in your head. You know, sometimes it's and maybe it's just word salad, right? And you get it out, but everyone else, you know, just knows even if it's not the same thing I encounter, I can feel you through what you're saying, you know, and I can be there with you. And, you know, when you're in the grocery store and someone says, hey, how you doing? What you say is, I'm fine, right? You know,
how about you?
And I always say, fine is just another 4-letter F word, really. So we need to kind of think about where can we go where we can really be and share, because we might not be able to do that in every space. And I think you talked about that a little bit earlier too, about, you know, sometimes you have to let go of things and maybe even some people when it's not working for you. So
yeah, there's nothing like those who have journeyed or are journeying through the same similar path. You know, like you said, they're all different, but that support that you get, that genuine understanding, it does give you space to just be honest, sometimes with yourself when you haven't been, and then also with others. And so that I think it's invaluable. I do think it's hard to find, to kind of make that step, you know, and say, hey, are you my people? because not every group is the same, and not every group are your people. So I say, if you've tried support group and it hasn't been a good fit for you, keep trying, because there's all different kinds out there. I volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association as a community educator. And so I know that that's a great resource, as well as other, you know, any local Alzheimer's groups are going to have some great support groups. Yeah, absolutely. You have to definitely think about where do you fit, because it's so true. You know, it is finding. It doesn't mean self-help doesn't work. Doesn't mean groups don't work. It means that's just not the one for you. So very important.
So Rayna, I wanted to ask you, as really a child when your mother was diagnosed, being such a young woman or girl, and going through that whole dementia journey, how do you think that changed you as a person and made you into the woman that you are today?
Definitely had a significant impact. I'm thankful that I had a faith in God before. And so I already felt a little different than my peers, to be honest with you, because my parents were older. And so having a terminal diagnosis, I was definitely the only one I knew that as a teenager that their parent had a terminal diagnosis. And so I was thankful that I had my relationship with God in order to be able to turn to that. But it did make me throughout, because my mom was nonverbal so early on, I did learn how to read the nonverbals and how to think about how things were impacting her. And one of the things that I will always remember is I was considering 2 different colleges, one that was just about 30 minutes from my house and one that was 2.5 hours from my parents. And my dad, being very wise, realized that I was really thinking about deciding to go to the one that was closer because of them. And he said to me, Rayna, I've got this, that it's not your job to take care of your mom. I've got her. So you go and live your life and be happy and make us proud, and it'll be okay. And so I was really thankful for his wisdom in that, because I don't know that I would have realized. I don't think I even articulated why I was choosing to go closer than the one I really wanted to go to. So I think just learning that things are outside of yourself. As a teenager, we don't do that very well. So I think I had to learn that, and I learned it probably earlier than others, and that compassion and that struggle of I really, I look back and don't feel like I really had a mom in those teenage years and beyond. I had a wonderful mom when I was little, but really knowing her as a person never happened for me. So I know that it had a big impact. And then it had a big impact on knowing what I wanted to do to care for my dad, because we'd already been there and we knew how hard it was going to be. So.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to some of the other questions that we have here. I wanted to ask, what do you wish you knew at the beginning of your dementia journey that you didn't find out until later?
I think that's a great question. And for me, I always think of the 2 different situations. So with my mom, I think probably one of the things is that they don't always go through all of the phases. We don't talk about that very much at all. It wasn't until I started, spending more time in my training with positive approach to care with Tifa Snow to realize that less than 50% actually get to that final fetal state. And my parents, neither one, went in that direction. I think knowing and anticipating how bad it's going to be, it doesn't do you any good. So, learning to just stay in the moment and enjoy what you can is one of the most valuable things that I learned. And sometimes I think in the beginning, you're busy trying to fix things so much that you miss that. And the longer it went along, the more that I knew I couldn't fix it. And so I just needed to enjoy what I had.
So true.
And if somebody said to you today, my loved one has dementia, what would be your response?
Honestly, it's, I'm so sorry. It is a really, really difficult journey. But there are beautiful blessings, and take every moment you can get while you can get it. So,
Yeah, it seems like an alien concept that there are joys and blessings and gifts in the dementia journey that people, you have to be open to them. And I think a lot of people are just shut down and they just see the negative. But what would be some of the blessings that you think then affected your life?
Yeah. So with my dad, especially because I spent so much time with him, as an adult, you don't go back and spend time with your parents. Not, you visit, but you don't spend long periods of time. And so I mentioned earlier the ping pong table. My dad was he was an athlete through and through. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers when he was young. He just loved sports. And so, he was 85 by the time he passed away. And so for us, it was a matter of how do we keep this active guy active? Because he stayed out of trouble. He slept better. All of those things. Was more cooperative when he was tired, when he was physically got to use that energy in that way. And so summer in Missouri is humid and hot and yucky. And so he wanted to be outside. He wanted to be, it was hard for him to let somebody else mow the grass and give those things up. He just wanted to kind of watch. He knew he couldn't do it anymore, but he always wanted to be around and outside. And, as they age, the heat it just impacts them differently. They don't let it go the same way. And so I was always looking for things to do. What can we do? We went to the gym regularly, but I was trying to find activities at home. He did puzzles and we spent a lot of time with coffee table books, reminiscing, especially Babe Ruth and all of those kind of ball players. He could tell stories, but he always liked to be active. And so I went to Walmart and picked up just a little ping pong net that goes on the dining room table, and the first time I pulled it out, we played for like 2 hours and just laughed and had so much fun that within a month, we bought a used ping pong table and moved the furniture out of the formal family room and moved the ping pong table in, and we played. And some of my favorite memories, he could hit the corner of the ping pong table over and over again. And he'd hit the corner, I would miss it, and then the ball would go all the way down the hall of all the bedrooms. And I'd have to go all the way to the end, and he'd just smirk at me. So great. We had so much fun. One time he served 3 ping pong balls at me at the same time. And just laughed whenever I was trying to figure out what to do. So, I think sometimes we just don't spend time with our parents, especially making those kinds of memories. And from bowling to we had a lot of fun, and we had our challenges. Do not get me wrong. There were more than enough tears, but like you said, I think the beauty of life is knowing that you're going to have both. This isn't either or, this is both and. And when we can learn to realize that life is full of both the blessings and the struggles, then we find more peace. And he helps me to do that at a different level.
Yeah, I think that's
beautiful.
really true, really beautiful. How to put that in perspective, right? That it's easy to kind of get sucked into this belief that everything's supposed to be happy, and if it's not happy, then it's wrong and bad. It's like, nope, that's just kind of life, and we have to be able to look at all of those, the things that,
And all relationships have challenges. I mean, you have challenges with people that you live with. And I often say that whenever, I'm not sure the last time someone told you when to eat, when to go to the bathroom, or when to go to bed. But for me, it was a really long time ago. So, and for my dad, it was even longer. So, when he's 83 years old and I'm trying to force him to my schedule, we're going to get pushback. So, learning how to honor that he still has his own will, and he still has, he's lived all of these years. And just because some memories are missing, some problem solving isn't there, it doesn't mean that those things that give us dignity are gone. So I think it was a matter of learning to see past the moment and just know the person and love the person and focus on him and what he needed and how I could help him with that. I know one of the things that concerned me in caregiving for him was, I spent a lot of years taking my mom to the restroom and doing those personal care things. When my dad was diagnosed and I knew I was moving in those periods of time, I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't see myself being able to do that with my dad. And, as an adult, we were adults, we had an adult relationship, and it was just hard to imagine being able to step into those roles with him. But I found myself learning to just see he just has a need. I just need to move in the moment, and he can't do it for himself. This isn't a choice. So let's just do what needs to be done and do it the best way that we can. So I think a lot of it is perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a great example too, because it's, when you can just start to see this is something that is normal and natural, and now I got to help because he can't. And at this point, and also that looking for opportunities for connection rather than always correcting. Just connection over correction is so important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Really good. Yes. And it sounds like you've touched on that.
Yeah. Where can people find your book?
So my book is available on all major platforms. It's available through Amazon, of course, Barnes & Noble, everywhere you can find books. I do sell a signed copy with the journal and a couple other little goodies through my website at aseasonofcaring.com. So if you're interested in getting a signed copy, I'd love to be able to send it out too.
Oh, great. And it's available in the All's Authors bookstore as well.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. And where can people find you on the internet, on social media?
Social media, most of it is under A Season of Caring, as well as or Rayna Neises. So I'm available also at aseasonofcaring.com. That's where we have a lot of the magazine, a lot of the resources, courses, and things that I've been working on to support caregivers. My most recent course that I released is on finding peace in grief for brokenhearted caregivers. So we have talking about some of the tough stuff, because I do believe that the hardest part of caregiving is not the physical part, it's the emotional part. And being able to say that you can care without regrets, I think has to do with dealing with those emotions. So
yeah,
100%. Yeah.
And you had talked about your support group. You said that was open to anyone. So can we get the link, and we'll put that in the show notes so anyone listening can sign on and attend as well? That's great. Yeah. And it's free. And
yes,
okay.
Free.
Is that on your website?
Yes. I can send you sign up through Nourish for Caregivers, but you can get there from my website. So, but I can send you the link.
Okay. Yeah, send me the link and we'll put that in the show notes. And I had one final question for you.
Okay.
What do you and your husband grow on the farm?
So we are grain farmers. So we are in the county that produces the most wheat in the United States, but we also grow corn, soybeans, and then we also do a lot of alfalfa to feed the cattle and things that are around us as well. So
that's amazing. How long have you been a farmer's wife?
13 years.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
That's amazing. I'd love to see photos of it. Do you have photos on the website?
Of the farm. Well, all the pictures of me are taken on the farm.
Okay.
And actually the cover of my book is just right up the road from us. It's part of our farm.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's beautiful.
So that's me walking along the road there. That's right by the house. Yeah. And there's a picture of Farmer on there too, which is, I call him Farmer. He has a name. His name's Ron, but it's one of those things. When I met him late in life, it was like, you're a farmer. I have never met a farmer. So I fell in love with Farmer. So I call him Farmer. Yeah.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rayna. It was lovely to meet you and to have you on the show. And I look forward to working with you more in the future.
I've started a memory cafe. I didn't talk about that either. Started a memory cafe monthly, where we just invite the community to come in with a caregiver. And so the person with memory loss and the caregiver attend. And our goal is to make memories and to be able to provide that support and get rid of the isolation that they're experiencing. And so I have my little library there that I always am encouraging people to check out new books and look at our resources. So I love what you guys are doing. I think it's amazing. So.
Oh, that's so great.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Love that.
Wonderful.
Love that.
Love it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rayna.
We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an All's Authors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on All's Authors, please visit allsauthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to allsauthors@gmail.com. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, totally reliant on donations to do what we do. If our authors' stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.
Hi, I'm Jean Lee from All's Authors. All the resources we offer at allsauthors.com, including this podcast, are brought to you free of charge. Our management team is a dedicated group of passionate volunteers who earn no financial compensation. But to continue our mission to provide valuable resources to dementia caregivers, we need the support of listeners like you. If you'd like to support us, please make a donation at allsauthors.com/donate. We are a 501c3 organization. Remember, you are not alone.